He knocked at 7 in the morning. I had just poured the coffee, the good stuff, the Ethiopian single origin I bought at the shop on Fillmore. The knock was too sharp to be a neighbor. I opened the door and there he was. David. 48 years old, still wearing those square-framed glasses I told him made him look like a professor who'd given up. He held a hard drive in his palm like he was delivering a verdict. Got the final footage, he said. Had to clean up a lot of it. Corruption issue. I looked past him at the driveway. My car, my daughter's car, Michael's Audi. David's rental, a white sedan I'd never seen before. Corruption, I said. Yeah. He shrugged, and the shrug was too casual. Most of the video is fine. But the parts with Michael, they got corrupted during the export. I saved what I could. It's mostly just you anyway. I took the hard drive. He was already backing away. You look good, Elena, he said. You look exactly the same. I closed the door before he could say anything else. Hard drive in my hand. Cold metal. I didn't plug it in. I set it on the counter next to my coffee, and I watched the cream swirl until the mug went cold. Michael was still upstairs. I could hear the shower running, the same old rhythm, water hitting tile, the faint hum of something he was singing off-key. He always sang in the shower. He never realized I could hear him. The day was supposed to be normal. That's what I told myself. Just another Thursday. I had a client meeting at 10, a zoning issue on a renovation project out in Pacific Heights that had been dragging on for weeks. I had to check the hard drive first. I had to know what he gave me. I sat down at the kitchen table, pulled out my laptop, and plugged it in. The footage loaded fast. David's work, I'll give him that, he knew how to shoot a wedding. Everything was golden light and soft focus. There was my daughter, Sarah, at the altar. There was her husband, Jake, looking like he might cry. There was Michael. He was standing at the front row, hands in his pockets, looking at the ceiling like he was counting tiles. The camera lingered on him for a long moment. Too long. Then the footage cut. A glitch. A stutter. And then I was watching myself walk down the aisle. David's camera had tracked me the whole way. Every step. Every breath. The footage was pristine. Not a single frame of corruption. I watched for 15 minutes, 20. The video was all me. Sarah and Jake, here and there, but mostly me. Michael was gone. Cut out. Deleted. The only shots where Michael appeared were the ones where I was in frame with him, and even then, David had cropped it so my husband was just a blur at the edge of the shot. I closed the laptop. I sat there in the quiet kitchen, and I felt something cold move through my chest. Not anger. Not yet. It was the feeling you get when you know something is wrong, but your brain hasn't caught up to it. Michael came downstairs in his suit, tie loose, coffee thermos in his hand. He kissed the top of my head like he always did. You okay? He said. You look pale. Just tired, I said. Long week. He nodded. He didn't ask about the hard drive. He didn't ask about David. He just poured his coffee, checked his phone, and walked out the door. I heard his Audi start in the driveway. I heard it pull away. And I sat there in the silence of the house, and I told myself it was nothing. Just an ex-boyfriend being petty. Just a photographer with a grudge. It didn't mean anything. But I couldn't stop thinking about the way David had looked at me when he handed me that hard drive. The way his eyes had held on mine for one beat too long. He wanted me to see what he'd done. He wanted me to notice. He was still trying, after all these years, to get my attention. I should have let it go. I should have deleted the footage and never thought about it again. But I didn't. I opened the laptop again. I pulled up the file directory. And there it was, the Cloud Sync icon in the corner of the screen. David's cloud account. He'd logged in on my computer during the wedding edit, and he'd never logged out. I sat there for a long time. The password was saved. I didn't have to guess. I didn't have to crack anything. I just had to click. My finger was over the mouse. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. I knew, in that moment, that clicking would change something. I didn't know what. I only knew that I was already done pretending it was nothing. The password was saved. He never logged out. I sat there for 30 seconds with my finger over the mouse, and then I clicked. The cloud folder opened. Thousands of raw files. I scrolled through thumbnails. Sarah's dress. Jake's cufflinks. The centerpieces. The cake. the band. And then I saw the timestamp. The parking lot. 15 minutes before the ceremony. The camera had been outside, pointed at the valet station. I clicked the file. The footage was unedited. Full frame. Full sound. The camera was stable, mounted on a tripod, pointed at Michael's Audi. He was standing next to the driver's side door. And there was someone else in the car. A woman. I could see her face through the windshield. Dark hair. Red lips. She was laughing. Michael was leaning into the window, his hand on the door frame, his whole body angled toward her in a way I recognized. I knew that posture. I had watched him lean toward me that way 1,000 times. He leaned toward that woman the same way. She handed him something, a piece of paper, maybe a receipt, and he folded it into his pocket. He looked around. He checked his watch. He looked around again. And then he opened the car door and sat down inside. The footage cut. There was more, but I didn't watch it. I didn't need to. I closed the laptop. I walked to the sink, and I stood there with my hands on the counter, and I watched the faucet drip. 1 drop. 2 drops. 3. I counted to 100. I wanted to feel something: rage, grief, a collapse. But what I felt was nothing. Just a hollow space where my heart used to be. I had been married for 17 years. I had built a life around this man. I had given him my time, my attention, every part of myself I thought he needed. And he had leaned into another woman's car window 15 minutes before walking our daughter down the aisle. I thought about Sarah. I thought about the way she looked at her father during the reception, the way she squeezed his hand during the toast. She didn't know. She would never have to know. That was the first thing I decided. She was starting her own life. I wasn't going to drag her into the wreckage of mine. I went upstairs. I opened my closet and I pulled out a suitcase. I hadn't packed a suitcase in years. Every trip I ever took, Michael packed for me. He liked the control of it. He liked knowing what was in my bag. I stood in front of the open case and I thought about what I needed. Not clothes. Not toiletries. I needed something else. I went to the office. I opened the filing cabinet. I pulled out every bank statement, every tax return, every retirement account summary I could find. I stacked them on the desk. 17 years of paperwork. 17 years of building something I thought was solid. I called Jane. Jane was a friend of a friend, a lawyer I'd met at a dinner party 2 years ago. She specialized in divorce. I remembered thinking at the time how strange it was that she was so open about it, how she talked about her work like it was a kindness she gave people. I had thought she was just optimistic. Now I understood. She gave people a way out. Elena, she said. This is unexpected. I need to talk to you, I said. I need to know what it looks like. The process. Who is he, Michael? She paused. Are you sure? I watched him get into another woman's car on our daughter's wedding day, I said. The footage was on my ex-boyfriend's camera. He was the photographer. It's a whole mess. But I'm sure. Come to my office tomorrow, she said. 9 o'clock. Don't tell him you're coming. Don't tell him anything. I showed up at Jane's office at 8:45. Her assistant brought me coffee in a ceramic mug, and I sat in the waiting room staring at the abstract art on the wall, trying to figure out what it was supposed to be. It looked like a bruise. I decided that was appropriate. Jane came out at 9 exactly. She was wearing a gray pantsuit and glasses on a chain around her neck, the kind my mother used to wear in the 80s. She shook my hand and led me into her office. No windows. Just a desk and 2 chairs and a bookshelf full of law books that looked like they'd never been opened. Tell me what you know, she said. I told her. I told her about David showing up at the house. I told her about the corrupted footage lie. I told her about the cloud account and the parking lot and the woman in the BMW. I didn't cry. I didn't even pause. It came out like a story I'd told 100 times before, except I'd never told it to anyone. Jane listened. She didn't take notes. She just leaned back in her chair with her hands folded on her stomach, and she let me talk until I ran out of words. Okay, she said. Here's what we need to do. First, you need a complete financial picture. Every account. Every asset. Every debt. You need to know exactly what you have and exactly what he has. Second, you need to decide whether you're filing for separation or divorce. The timeline matters. California law requires 6 months of separation before a divorce can be finalized. If you file for legal separation, we can start that clock now. Third. Third what third? You need to decide if you want him to know you know. I looked at her. She was asking the same question I'd been asking myself since I watched that footage. What did I want Michael to know? Did I want to confront him? Did I want to give him the chance to explain, to lie, to apologize? Did I want to watch his face when he realized I'd seen everything? I don't want him to know yet, I said. Good. Then we do this quietly. I'll send you a list of documents to gather. Don't tip him off. Don't change your behavior. And don't tell anyone you can't trust absolutely. Who can I trust absolutely right now? No one. Not even your daughter. Not until you're ready. I nodded. I understood. I had spent 17 years trusting Michael, and look where that got me. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. I went home, and I started gathering. It took me 3 days. 3 days of Michael coming home, kissing my forehead, asking about my day, and me telling him the same lies he'd been telling me for years. Fine. Good. The client meeting was fine. The zoning issue is dragging. He never noticed anything was wrong. He never looked at me long enough to see the cracks. The documents piled up on my desk. Bank statements from 3 different accounts. Retirement funds. Investment portfolios. The deed to the house. Michael's business expenses. I found receipts for hotel stays in cities where he never told me he was traveling. I found credit card charges for restaurants I'd never heard of. I found a receipt for a jewelry store in Chicago. I looked up the date. It was the same week as the conference. He'd bought her something. I didn't know what. I didn't want to know. I went back to the cloud folder. I knew I shouldn't. I knew I was just hurting myself. But I couldn't stop. I needed to see how much there was. I scrolled through the files. There were hundreds. David had been shooting everything. Every moment. Every angle. He'd captured the whole wedding from start to finish. And he'd cut out Michael wherever he could. But he hadn't cut out the parking lot. He'd kept that. I didn't understand why. Maybe he didn't know what he was filming. Maybe he'd set up the camera and walked away. Maybe he was just as blind as I'd been. I watched the footage again. The woman in the BMW. Rachel. I learned her name from the credit card receipts. Rachel Harris. She'd charged a meal at the hotel restaurant the same night as the conference. The receipt had her signature. Clear as day. I looked her up. Pharmaceutical rep, 38. Divorced. Mother of 2. I felt something shift in my chest. Not pity. Not anger. Something stranger. I knew her, in a way. I knew what it was like to be the woman in the car. I'd been that woman once, 20 years ago, when Michael was still the man who leaned into my window and made me laugh. I'd been the one who got the jewelry. I'd been the one who believed him when he said his marriage was over. It wasn't over. It was never over. He'd just found someone new to tell the same story to. I closed the laptop. I walked away from the desk. I went to the kitchen and I opened the wine cabinet. I took out a bottle of the good Pinot, the one we were saving for our anniversary, and I poured myself a glass. I sat at the breakfast nook and I stared out the window at the garden I'd planted with my own hands. The roses were blooming. The lavender was in full purple. I'd built that garden. I'd dug every hole, planted every bulb. Michael had never touched a single flower. I thought about all the things I'd built that he took credit for. The house. The garden. Our daughter. Our life. He walked through it all like he'd created it, like it was his due, and I had let him. I had handed him the keys and stepped back and told myself I was being a good wife. You need to decide if you want him to know you know. Jane's voice in my head. I took another sip of wine. I thought about what it would be like to tell him. To watch his face crumble. To see him try to explain. I imagined the words he'd use. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. I was lonely. I was confused. I was going to leave you, I just didn't know how to say it. I'd heard it all before. Not from Michael. From my mother. From my friends. I'd sat through 100 divorce stories in my life, and they all had the same shape. The same excuses. The same half-hearted apologies that meant nothing because the thing that was broken couldn't be fixed with sorry. I didn't want Michael's apology. I didn't want his explanation. I didn't want to hear his voice go soft and desperate, the way it did when he wanted something from me. I'd heard that voice too many times. It was the voice he used when he wanted me to forgive him for forgetting our anniversary, for missing Sarah's school play, for coming home too late to have dinner together. I was done forgiving him for things he didn't even feel bad about. The next morning, I went to the bank. I opened a separate account in my name only. I transferred half the joint savings into it. It wasn't theft. It was ours. I had every right to take my share. I left enough in the joint account to cover the mortgage and the bills for 3 months. I didn't want him to notice. I wanted him to think everything was normal. I went to the post office and I opened a P.O. box. I started having my mail sent there. Nothing suspicious. Just the bank statements. The retirement updates. Anything that Michael might see and wonder about. I went to a real estate agent and I started looking at apartments. Small places. 2 bedrooms at most. I wanted to be close to the city, close to work, close to something that wasn't our house. I found one in the Mission. A 3rd-floor walk-up with a fire escape and a view of the skyline. It was nothing like the house. It was bright and bare and it smelled like fresh paint. I signed a 6-month lease without telling anyone. I started packing my things. Slowly. Carefully. A box at a time. I filled boxes with clothes I hadn't worn in years, books I'd forgotten I owned, photos of Sarah that I couldn't leave behind. I put them in the back of my closet. Michael never went in there. He didn't know where I kept anything. And every night, I sat at my desk and I looked at the cloud folder. I looked at David's work. I watched the footage of Rachel's car. I watched Michael check his watch. I watched the way his body relaxed when he got into that car, the way his shoulders dropped, the way he reached for her hand. I watched it until I couldn't feel anything anymore. Until the image was burned into my brain. Until I knew exactly what I was going to do. I found David's online calendar. He didn't make it hard. His website had a schedule of upcoming gigs, all public, all available. He was shooting a wedding in Napa in 3 weeks. A big one. The venue was a vineyard I'd worked on as a designer 5 years ago. I knew it inside and out. I knew where they kept the AV equipment. I knew how to get in without being seen. I waited. 3 weeks. That was the longest part. 3 weeks of pretending. 3 weeks of smiling at Michael, eating dinner with him, sleeping beside him. 3 weeks of watching him kiss my forehead every morning and walk out the door to his car. 3 weeks of knowing he'd driven that car to meet her. Knowing he leaned into her window the same way he used to lean into mine. I stayed calm. I kept my voice even. I answered his questions about my day. I didn't give him anything to suspect. And when the night came, I drove to Napa. I parked a mile from the venue. I walked through the vineyard in the dark. I knew the side gate was unlocked. I knew the staff entrance by the kitchen. I knew exactly which closet held the AV rack where the USB drive would be inserted into the computer that controlled the projector for the reception slideshow. I slipped the USB into my pocket. It contained one file. The parking lot footage. Unedited. Full frame. Full color. The timestamp in the corner. The BMW. Michael's watch. The look on his face. I walked back to my car. I drove home. I climbed into bed beside my husband and I lay awake until the sun came up. He never knew I'd left. He never knew I was gone. That was the part that broke something in me. He didn't even notice. 3 days after the Napa wedding, I saw the Instagram post. The bride's account was public. She had a feed full of engagement photos, dress fittings, tasteful flat lays of invitations, and place cards. I'd been checking it every morning, waiting. And then it was there. A screenshot of a text message. The caption read, "I'm sorry. I can't do this. The wedding is off." The text was sent to someone named Marcus. The groom. I didn't know him. I didn't know her. But I knew exactly what she'd seen. The USB had been waiting on the AV rack for someone to find. The footage would have played on the projector during the cocktail hour if she'd waited. But she must have seen it earlier. She must have checked what was on the drive before the reception. Maybe she was curious. Maybe she was suspicious. It didn't matter. She'd seen the footage and she'd made her choice. I closed the app. I sat with my phone in my hand and I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not satisfaction. Not vengeance. It was something colder. I had given her information and she had used it. That was all. I didn't destroy David. I just showed a bride what kind of man she was marrying. She did the rest herself. She had the courage I didn't have, not yet. She'd called it off. She'd walked away. And I was still lying in bed next to a man who didn't know I existed. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't pretend. I got up that morning and I walked past Michael in the kitchen. He was reading something on his phone, coffee in hand, tie undone. He looked up when I passed him. "You okay?" he asked. Same question. Same tone. The same careful distance. "Fine," I said. The word tasted like ash. He nodded. He went back to his phone. He didn't watch me leave the room. He didn't notice that I'd taken the suitcase out of the closet and set it by the door. He didn't see the boxes I'd packed in the spare bedroom. He didn't see any of it. He wasn't looking. I called Jane that afternoon. "I'm ready," I said. "I want to file legal separation or divorce separation. Start the clock." "Okay. I'll have the papers ready by Friday." "Are you ready to serve him? I want to do it myself." "You sure?" "I've been sure for 3 weeks. I'm not getting less sure." She sighed. I could hear her typing in the background. "Elena, once you serve those papers, there's no going back. You can't unfile. You can't pretend you didn't mean it. He'll know. And once he knows, everything changes." "I know. If you want, I can have a process server deliver them. You don't have to be there." "No," I said. "I need to see his face. I need to say it to him. I've been silent for 17 years. I'm not going to be silent about this." She told me to come in Thursday to sign. I hung up the phone and I walked through the house one more time. Our house. The house we'd bought together when Sarah was 2, the house with the creaky floorboards and the fireplace that never worked right and the garden I'd built myself. I stopped in every room. The kitchen where we'd taught Sarah to bake cookies. The living room where we'd hosted Thanksgivings and birthdays. The bedroom where I'd lain awake for so many nights, wondering why I felt so alone. I went to the breakfast nook. The same table where we'd had our first breakfast together after moving in. The same chairs. The same window overlooking the garden. I sat down and I waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Some kind of sign. Some signal that I was making the right choice. But nothing came. Just the sound of my own breathing. Just the silence. Michael came home at 6. He was carrying flowers. Daisies. The kind they sell at the grocery store. The kind I hated. He'd never remembered. 17 years, and he'd never once noticed that I flinched when he brought them home. "These are for you," he said, handing me the bouquet. I saw them and I thought of you. I took them. I set them on the counter. I didn't say thank you. "Elena, are you okay?" I looked at him. He was standing in the kitchen in his work clothes, the same white shirt and navy tie he wore every day. His hair was thinning. His face was lined. He looked tired. He looked the way he always looked. Like a man who'd stopped paying attention a long time ago. "Sit down," I said. "We need to talk." He frowned. "What about?" "Sit." He sat. He pulled out the chair across from me, and he sat down at the breakfast nook. He put his hands on the table. His wedding ring caught the light. I stared at it. I'd never really looked at it before. It was just a ring. Just a circle of metal. But it was the only evidence I had that we'd ever been married. That we'd ever meant anything. "Michael," I said. "I know about Rachel." He went still. I saw it happen. The way his body locked, the way his eyes stopped moving, the way his breath caught in his chest. He knew exactly who I meant. He didn't ask me to explain. "Elena, don't. Let me finish." He closed his mouth. He folded his hands on the table. He looked at me like I was a stranger. "I know about the conference in Chicago. I know you've been having an affair for 3 years. I know you drove her car on the day of Sarah's wedding. I know you checked your watch during the father-daughter dance because you were calculating how soon you could text her." He opened his mouth. I held up my hand. "I've known for a month. A month, Michael. I've been sitting in this house with you, eating dinner with you, sleeping next to you. And you didn't notice. You didn't see me. You didn't even ask why I was quiet." "Elena, I'm sorry. I was going to tell you." "Were you when I found out when she dumped you?" He flinched. I saw it. He hadn't expected me to know that part. She did dump you, didn't she? I said. 6 months ago. She ended it. And you came home and you bought me flowers and you pretended everything was fine. Elena, it wasn't. Don't tell me it wasn't real. I don't care if it was real. I care that you lied. I care that you looked at me every day and you said nothing. I care that you let me plan Sarah's wedding while you were driving another woman to her hotel. I care that I spent 17 years trying to make you happy and you never once told me you weren't. I stopped. I was breathing too fast. I put my hands flat on the table. I'm not leaving because you broke my heart, I said. I'm leaving because I finally see how small you made my life. He stared at me. His eyes were wet. He was going to cry. I'd seen him cry before at his father's funeral, at Sarah's birth. But this was different. This was self-pity. This was the tears of a man who'd been caught. Where are you going to go? He asked. That's not your concern anymore. You can't just. I already did. I stood up. I walked to the counter. I pulled out the separation papers and I set them in front of him. He stared at them like they were written in another language. I filed this morning, I said. You'll receive the service by Wednesday. I've already moved my things. I'm not staying here another night. He stood up. Elena, please. Let's talk about this. Let's figure this out. We've been together for 20 years. We can't just 20 years, I said. 20 years, Michael. And you couldn't keep your hands off another woman for one afternoon. I walked to the door. He followed me. I could hear his footsteps on the floor. But I didn't turn around. I opened the front door. The taxi was waiting. I'd called it 10 minutes before I started talking. I didn't want to give him time to change my mind. Elena. Please. I turned around. I looked at him one last time. He was standing in the doorway of the house we'd built together. He was holding the flowers I'd left on the counter. The daisies. He was holding them like a shield. You should know, I said. The photographer you hired. The one who gave us the footage, David. He cut you out of every video. It was just me. He kept footage of you getting into Rachel's car. He kept it on his cloud account. I found it. I sent a copy to the bride at his next wedding. She canceled. Michael's face went white. You did what I told you. I'm done staying silent. I stepped into the taxi. I pulled the door closed. I didn't look back. I told the driver the address of my new apartment. He pulled away from the curb. I watched the house shrink in the rearview mirror until it was just a smudge of light in the dark. I sat in the back of the taxi and I breathed for the first time in a month. The apartment was exactly what I remembered. Bright. Bare. The smell of fresh paint still hung in the air. I walked through the rooms and I touched the walls like I was testing if they were real. The living room had a bay window that looked out over the city. The kitchen had a butcher block counter and a gas stove that actually worked. The bedroom was small, just big enough for a bed and a dresser, but the closet was mine. All mine. Nobody else's shirts taking up half the rod. Nobody else's shoes scattered on the floor. I sat down on the floor in the middle of the living room. No furniture. Just me and the hardwood and the moonlight coming through the window. I didn't cry. I'd used up all my tears in the taxi. I just sat there and I let myself feel the emptiness. It wasn't loneliness. It was space. Space I hadn't realized I'd been missing until I finally had it. My phone buzzed. Michael. I ignored it. It buzzed again. I turned it off. I didn't want to hear his voice. I didn't want to read his excuses. I'd heard enough words from that man to last a lifetime. I slept on the floor that night. I didn't have a mattress yet. I didn't care. I lay on my back and I stared at the ceiling and I listened to the city sounds outside. Sirens. Cars. A dog barking somewhere down the street. It was the most alive I'd felt in years. The next morning, I went to the hardware store. I bought a paint roller, a tray, and a gallon of something called Distant Shore, a pale blue-gray that reminded me of the ocean in Monterey. I spent the whole day painting the living room. I didn't have furniture. I didn't have anything. But I had walls. And I was going to make them mine. My phone stayed off until noon. When I turned it back on, there were 12 missed calls. 7 from Michael. 3 from Sarah. 2 from a number I didn't recognize. I called Sarah first. Mom. What the hell happened? Your father didn't tell you. He said you left. He said you filed papers. He wouldn't tell me why. I sat down on the paint-splattered floor. I held the phone to my ear and I took a breath. Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. And I need you to hear me out before you say anything. Mom, you're scaring me. I know. I'm sorry. But I need you to know the truth. Your father has been having an affair for 3 years. I found out a month ago. I've been trying to figure out what to do, and I decided to leave. I'm not going back. Sarah was quiet for a long time. I could hear her breathing. I could hear the muffled sound of someone talking in the background. Jake, probably. I waited. He was having an affair, she said finally. At our wedding. Yes. The photographer. David. He was your ex-boyfriend. Yes. Mom, what the hell, why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want you to know. I still don't. But you deserve to hear it from me. She was quiet again. Then she said, where are you? New apartment. In the city. I'm not giving you the address yet. I need some time. Mom, you don't have to do this alone. I'm not alone. I have me. That's enough. She laughed. It was a watery laugh, the kind you make when you're trying not to cry. You sound like Grandma. She was right about a lot of things. We talked for another 10 minutes. I told her about the apartment. I told her about the paint. I told her I was going to be okay. She told me she loved me. She told me Jake was making her go to therapy. She told me she was furious at her father, but she didn't know how to feel about it. I told her she didn't have to feel anything right now. She could just let it sit. I hung up and I went back to painting. The blue-gray went on smooth. It covered the white walls like a tide coming in. I painted until my arms ached and my back screamed and my hands were covered in paint that wouldn't come off. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Movement was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. The phone rang again. David. I stared at his name on the screen. I didn't answer. He called again. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message. I listened to it later that night. Elena. I know it was you. The USB. The footage. I know you sent it. What the hell were you thinking? You ruined my business. You ruined my reputation. I have brides canceling left and right. I don't even know how many. This is my life, Elena. You can't just. I deleted the message. I didn't call him back. I didn't owe him anything. He'd crossed a line the moment he cut Michael out of that footage. He'd crossed another line when he left his cloud account logged in. And he'd crossed every line that mattered when he kept the parking lot footage. He knew what he'd filmed. He knew who Michael was meeting. He'd made a choice to keep it, and he'd made a choice to show it to me. He didn't think I'd do anything with it. He thought I was still the same woman who'd broken up with him 25 years ago. A woman who wouldn't make a scene. A woman who'd just take the evidence and file it away and never speak of it again. He was wrong. I went to bed that night on a borrowed mattress my neighbor had given me. She was a woman named Claire who lived 2 floors down. She was 62, recently widowed, and she had a habit of leaving things outside her door with a note saying free. The mattress was a twin, too small for 2, perfect for 1. I dragged it up the stairs and I put it in the corner of the bedroom. I didn't have sheets yet. I wrapped myself in a blanket I'd taken from the house and I fell asleep to the sound of the city. The next few weeks were quiet. I went to work. I finished the Pacific Heights project. I took on a new client, a restaurant in the Mission that wanted to feel like a speakeasy. I spent my days in meetings and my nights in the apartment, slowly filling it with things that were mine. A table from a thrift store. A lamp I'd bought at a flea market. A rug that smelled like cedar and old wool. I didn't need much. I didn't want much. I just wanted space. Michael kept calling. I answered once, 2 weeks after I left. He was crying. He said he was sorry. He said he'd made a terrible mistake. He said he'd do anything to make it right. I listened to him for 5 minutes and then I said, you should have done something 3 years ago. You did nothing. That's your answer. I hung up. I didn't answer again. Sarah came to visit. She brought Jake with her. They stood in the middle of my living room and looked at the blue-gray walls and the thrift store table and the floor lamp that didn't match anything. Sarah said, Mom, this is actually nice. Thank you. It's not your house. That's the point. She hugged me. Jake shook my hand. They stayed for dinner. I made pasta in the tiny kitchen and we ate at the thrift store table, and I told them about the speakeasy project. Sarah told me she was thinking about going back to school. Jake told me he was applying for a new job. Normal things. Ordinary things. Things that felt impossible a month ago. After they left, I stood in the middle of the apartment and I looked around. It was still mostly empty, but it had started to feel like mine. The paint was dry. The rug was down. The lamp cast a warm circle of light on the floor. I had a home. Not a house. A home. I thought about the garden. I wondered if the roses were still blooming. I wondered if Michael had watered them. I'd left a watering schedule on the fridge just in case. I knew he wouldn't look at it. He'd never once looked at the watering schedule when I was there. He wasn't about to start now. I didn't care. The roses would survive. They always did. They were tough things, roses. They could take the drought and the heat and the neglect. They'd come back every spring, stronger than before. I knew exactly how they felt. I went to the window and I looked out at the city. The lights were starting to come on. Millions of little sparks in the dark. I thought about all the women out there, sitting in their own apartments, looking at their own windows. Women who'd left. Women who'd stayed. Women who'd never been given the choice. I was one of the lucky ones. I got to choose. I got to paint my walls blue-gray and sleep on a borrowed mattress and buy a thrift store table with money that was mine. I got to wake up in the morning and look in the mirror and see someone who wasn't defined by the man she'd married. My phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. David. I let it ring. He left a voicemail. I didn't listen to it. I had nothing left to say to him. He'd done what he'd done. I'd done what I'd done. We were even. I poured myself a glass of wine. The good Pinot I'd bought myself. Not the anniversary bottle. That one was still in the house, probably still in the wine cabinet. I'd left it there. I didn't want it. I wanted something new. I sat down on the floor with my wine and my phone. I scrolled through Instagram. I saw the bride from Napa. She was on a beach somewhere. Her caption said, "Best decision I ever made." I smiled. I didn't know her. I didn't need to. She was okay. That was enough. I put the phone down. I drank my wine. I sat in the quiet and I let myself exist. No husband. No marriage. No lies. Just me and the city and the night and the long road ahead. I didn't know what came next. I didn't need to. For the first time in 17 years, I wasn't waiting for someone else to decide my future. I was already living it. 3 weeks in the apartment, and I started sleeping through the night. Not every night. Some nights I still woke up at 3 in the morning, heart pounding, reaching for a body that wasn't there. But most nights I slept. The kind of deep, dreamless sleep I hadn't had in years. No tension in my shoulders. No listening for the front door. No lying awake wondering why I felt so alone in a house full of someone else. I started running. Not the kind of running you do on a treadmill at the gym. The kind where you put on old sneakers and hit the pavement before sunrise. I ran along the Embarcadero, past the ferry building, past the piers, past the sleeping seagulls on the docks. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached and I couldn't think about anything except the rhythm of my feet on the concrete. At work, things got better. The speakeasy project went through without a hitch. The client loved my designs. They paid on time. I started getting referrals. Word spread. A boutique hotel in Soma wanted me to redesign their lobby. A couple in No Valley wanted me to gut their kitchen and start over. I said yes to everything. I didn't care about the hours. I didn't care about the money, not really. I just wanted to build things that were mine. I thought about the house. I thought about the garden. I thought about the roses and the lavender and the hydrangeas I'd planted along the fence. I wondered if Michael had remembered to water them. I wondered if he'd hired someone. I wondered if he'd let them die. I didn't call to ask. I couldn't. Calling would mean caring, and I was done caring about things he was supposed to take care of. Sarah came over every Sunday. She'd bring bagels and coffee, and we'd sit on my fire escape and watch the city wake up. She didn't talk about her father. I didn't bring him up. We talked about her job, her husband, her plans. She was going to start grad school in the fall. She wanted to study art history. I told her I was proud of her. She told me she was proud of me. We sat on the fire escape and we watched the sunrise and we didn't say anything about all the things we couldn't fix. Michael started leaving voicemails. Not every day. Once or twice a week. They were always the same. He was sorry. He missed me. He didn't understand how it had come to this. He wanted to talk. He wanted to fix things. He wanted me to come home. I listened to the first few. Then I stopped. I didn't need to hear his voice. I knew what he sounded like. I'd heard that voice for 17 years. It didn't have anything new to say. I got a call from Jane. She wanted to check in. I told her I was fine. She asked if Michael had responded to the separation papers. I said he'd signed them. He hadn't contested anything. He'd kept the house. I'd kept my share of the savings. It was clean. It was quick. It was over. He's not going to fight you, Jane said. He's not going to make it difficult. I know. How do you feel about that? I don't know how I feel. I don't think I need to. She was quiet for a minute. Then she said, "You're doing okay, Elena. You're really doing okay." I know. That's the weird part. I thought I'd be more broken. You were broken a long time ago. You just didn't know it. I hung up. I sat in the living room with the blue-gray walls and the thrift store table and the rug that smelled like cedar. I thought about what Jane said. She was right. I'd been broken for years. I'd just been too busy holding things together to notice. It took losing everything to realize I'd already lost it. The next Sunday, Sarah brought Jake instead of bagels. She looked nervous. She sat on the couch and twisted her hands in her lap. "Mom, I need to tell you something." "Okay." Dad called me. He wanted to know if I'd talk to you. He said he's been trying to get a hold of you for weeks. I know. He leaves voicemails. "Mom, he's not doing well. He's drinking. He's not going to work. He's just sitting in the house all day." I looked at her. I saw the worry in her eyes. I saw the daughter who still loved her father, even after everything he'd done. "That's not my responsibility," I said. "I know. I know it's not. But he's still my dad. And he's still your husband. Ex-husband. Soon to be. Mom. Please. Just talk to him. Just once. For me." I looked at Jake. He was watching me with the same eyes. The same plea. They wanted me to be the bigger person. They wanted me to fix something that couldn't be fixed. "Okay," I said. "I'll talk to him. Once. But I'm not going to change my mind." Sarah hugged me. Jake patted my shoulder. They left an hour later, relieved. I sat in the apartment and I stared at the wall. I knew what I was going to say. I'd been practicing it in my head for weeks. It was the same speech I'd given him on the night I left, but sharper. Cleaner. Without the edges of fresh pain. I called him that night. He answered on the first ring. "Elena. Thank you. I wasn't sure you'd call back. I told Sarah I would. Let's get this over with. Can we meet in person? I need to say this to your face." I thought about it. I didn't want to see him. I didn't want to be in a room with him. But I also didn't want to give him the satisfaction of hiding behind a phone. Where? The breakfast nook. At the house. No. Somewhere neutral. A coffee shop. I don't want to do this in public. Then we don't do it at all. Silence. I could hear him breathing. I could hear the weight of the pause. "Okay," he said finally. "There's a place on Valencia. Café Alma. Do you know it? I know it. Tomorrow at 3. Please. Just come. I'll be there." I hung up. I sat on the floor of my empty apartment and I thought about what I was going to say. I didn't have to plan it. I already knew. I'd been carrying it around for weeks, a stone in my pocket, waiting for the right moment to drop it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the borrowed mattress and I looked at the ceiling and I counted the hours until 3 o'clock. When the sun came up, I took a shower. I put on a dress I'd bought at a secondhand store, one that fit me better than anything I'd owned in years. I did my hair. I put on lipstick. I looked at myself in the mirror and I saw someone I almost recognized. I walked to Café Alma. It was a small place, the kind with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu. I got there early. I ordered a coffee and I sat at a table in the corner and I waited. Michael walked in at 3. He looked thinner. His suit hung loose on him. His eyes were red. He'd been drinking, I could tell. Not drunk, but close. He slid into the chair across from me and he put his hands on the table. The wedding ring was still there. Thank you for coming, he said. I said I would. He nodded. He stared at me like he was trying to memorize my face. Elena, I need you to understand something. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to leave you. I didn't know what to do. You knew exactly what to do, I said. You just didn't want to do it. Elena, how many years? Michael, how many years did you look at me and lie? I stopped counting after the first year. I felt something cold move through my chest. He'd stopped counting. He'd been lying for so long that the lies had become a habit. He didn't even know which parts were true anymore. Where's Rachel? I asked. She moved. To Portland. She's with someone else. Good for her. He flinched. Elena, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know sorry doesn't fix anything. I know it's not enough. But I need you to know that I regret it. Every single day. I looked at him. His eyes were wet. His hands were shaking. He looked like a man who'd been running for years and finally stopped. Michael, I said. I don't care if you regret it. I don't care if you're sorry. I care that you did it. I care that you did it for 3 years and never once thought about me. I cared about that for a long time. I don't anymore. Then why did you come? I came because Sarah asked me to. I came because I wanted to say this to your face. I came because I'm done being the woman who stays quiet. I stood up. He stood up too. He reached for my hand. I pulled it away. Please, he said. Elena. Don't go. I'm not going anywhere, I said. I'm already gone. I walked out of the cafe. I didn't look back. I walked down Valencia Street with the sun on my face and I felt nothing. No anger. No grief. No love. Just the quiet satisfaction of a woman who'd said everything she needed to say. I went home. I went to my empty apartment. I sat on the floor and I breathed. And for the first time in 20 years, I felt free. The weeks after Cafe Alma were different. The silence in the apartment stopped feeling empty and started feeling full. Full of possibility. Full of space. Full of the sound of my own breathing, which I'd stopped listening to a long time ago. I woke up one morning and I realized I hadn't thought about Michael in 3 days. I hadn't checked my phone for his name. I hadn't replayed the footage in my head. The images were still there, but they'd faded. They were just pictures now. Things that happened. Things that didn't happen anymore. I started buying furniture. Real furniture. A couch from a store in the Mission, dark green velvet that I'd wanted for years. A bed frame made of reclaimed wood. A kitchen table that seated 4, even though I never had more than 2 people over. I filled the apartment with things I chose. No compromises. No input from anyone else. I picked the pieces that made me feel something, and I put them where I wanted them to go. The speakeasy project finished. The hotel lobby got a feature in a design blog. I got more calls. I hired an assistant, a young woman named Maya who was just out of school and full of ideas. We worked together in my apartment on the days I didn't have meetings. She brought coffee and enthusiasm and a complete lack of knowledge about my personal life. I didn't tell her about Michael. I didn't tell her about David. I just worked with her and let her think I was a woman who'd always lived alone. Claire, the neighbor who'd given me the mattress, knocked on my door one Saturday morning. She was holding a potted plant. A monstera, big leaves, the kind that needed a lot of light and a lot of attention. I had an extra, she said. Thought you might like it. Claire, you gave me a mattress. Now a plant. I owe you my life. Don't owe me anything. Just take the plant. And if you want to come down for coffee sometime, I'm always around. I took the plant. I put it by the bay window. It looked like it belonged there. I thought about how strange it was that a stranger had been kinder to me in 2 months than my husband had been in 17 years. I started seeing a therapist. A woman named Linda who had gray hair and a calm voice and a tendency to repeat things back to me in ways that made me see them differently. I told her about the marriage. I told her about the affair. I told her about the footage and the USB and the bride in Napa. I told her everything I hadn't told anyone else. She listened. She asked questions. She didn't judge me. Do you feel guilty? She asked one session. About what you did to David? No. He crossed a line. He knew what he was doing. Do you feel guilty about the bride? No. I gave her information. She made her own choice. What about Michael? I paused. I thought about the question. Did I feel guilty I'd left him? I'd packed my bags and filed papers and walked out the door. I'd taken half the savings and left him with a house full of memories and a garden he didn't know how to water. No, I said finally. I don't feel guilty. I feel free. Linda smiled. She wrote something in her notebook. I didn't ask what it was. I kept running. The Embarcadero in the morning became a ritual. The rhythm of my feet on the pavement. The cold air on my face. The smell of salt from the bay. I ran farther every week, pushing myself past the piers, past the tourist shops, past the cruise ships docked at the terminal. I ran until I didn't have the energy to think. And when I stopped, I was always somewhere new. Sarah came over one evening without Jake. She brought wine and cheese and a seriousness I hadn't seen in her since she was a teenager. We sat on the fire escape and watched the sun go down over the city. Mom, I need to ask you something. Okay. Are you ever going to forgive him? I thought about the question. I'd been asking myself the same thing for months. The answer changed every time I thought about it. I don't know, I said. I don't think forgiveness is the point. I think the point is moving on. I'm not going to carry him with me. I'm not going to let him take up space in my head. That's enough. But do you still love him? I looked at Sarah. She was 24 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. She was looking at me like I had the answers. I don't know, I said. I think I loved who I thought he was. I think I loved the idea of him. But the real him, the one who lied to me for 3 years, I don't know if I ever loved that person. I don't know if that person exists. Sarah was quiet. She reached over and squeezed my hand. I'm sorry, she said. I'm sorry you had to go through that. I'm not, I said. I'm not sorry. Because if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't be here. And I think this is the first time in a long time that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. She cried a little. I held her. We sat on the fire escape and watched the lights come on, and we didn't talk about Michael again. The divorce papers were finalized on a Thursday. Jane called me at work. It's done, she said. It's over. Thank you. Elena. You did good. You did really good. I hung up. I sat at my desk and I stared at the blue-gray wall, and I didn't feel anything. Not relief. Not sadness. Just a quiet sense of completion. One chapter had ended. Another one was beginning. I went home that night and I cooked myself dinner. A real dinner. Salmon and asparagus and a salad. I sat at my new kitchen table and I ate alone and I read a book and I didn't think about Michael once. The next day, I went to the house. Michael was at work. I'd checked. I wanted to see the garden. I wanted to see what had happened to the roses. I used my old key to unlock the back gate. The garden was overgrown. The roses were still blooming, but they were wild, untrimmed, climbing over each other like they were trying to escape. The lavender had gone brown. The hydrangeas were drooping. It was a mess. A beautiful, chaotic mess. I stood in the middle of the garden and I looked at what I'd built. It was still there. It was still mine. Even if I wasn't living there anymore, even if Michael was letting it fall apart, it was still the thing I'd created. I walked through the back door into the kitchen. The house was empty. Quiet. No signs of life. I walked through the rooms I used to know. The living room. The hallway. Sarah's old bedroom. Michael's office. Everything was still there. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. I went to the breakfast nook. The table where I'd sat with Michael on the day I left. The chairs where we'd drunk our coffee every morning. I looked at it and I didn't feel anything. It was just a room. Just a table. Just a house. I walked out the front door and I locked it behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. That night, I called Claire. I asked if she wanted to have coffee in the morning. She said yes. We sat in her apartment, which was full of books and photographs and the scent of old wood, and we talked about nothing and everything. She told me about her husband. She told me about his death. She told me about the years they'd had and the years she'd lost. I told her about Michael. I told her about the garden. I told her about the apartment and the running and the feeling of being alone. You're not alone, she said. You're never alone. You just forgot what it felt like to be by yourself. I went back upstairs to my apartment. I looked at the monstera by the window. I looked at the green velvet couch. I looked at the kitchen table that seated four and the bed frame made of reclaimed wood and the blue-gray walls that I'd painted with my own hands. I'd built all of it. Every piece. Every corner. Every detail. I thought about the final conversation I'd had with Michael in the cafe. I thought about the look on his face when I'd said I was already gone. I thought about the silence that followed, the way he'd sat there with nothing left to say. I sat on my couch. I looked at the city skyline through the bay window. I didn't think about the future. I didn't think about what came next. I just sat there and let myself be exactly where I was. And I was okay. The morning came like any other. I woke up in my bed, the reclaimed wood frame solid beneath me, the light from the bay window painting stripes across the floor. I lay there for a while, listening to the city wake up outside. A garbage truck. A neighbor's radio. The distant hum of the BART train heading into the city. I didn't have anywhere to be until 10. I let myself stay still. I made coffee. The Ethiopian single origin from the shop on Fillmore. The same coffee I'd been drinking the morning David knocked on the door. I poured it into a mug I'd bought at a flea market, mismatched and chipped, and I sat at the kitchen table that seated four and I watched the steam rise. I thought about how different I was from the woman who'd opened that door. I thought about how much had changed in 5 months. I thought about the footage, the USB, the bride, the cafe, the house, the garden. I thought about Michael. I didn't feel the same way about him anymore. I didn't feel anything, really. Not the ache I'd carried for so long. Not the anger that had kept me moving in the early weeks. Not the grief I'd expected to drown in. He was just a man I used to know. A man I used to love. A man who'd broken something I thought was unbreakable. But the thing about broken things, they can be put back together. Sometimes they're stronger at the seams. I checked my phone. No messages from Michael. I hadn't heard from him in weeks. He'd stopped calling after the cafe. Maybe he'd finally understood. Maybe he was too drunk to pick up the phone. Maybe he'd moved on. I didn't know. I didn't need to. Sarah texted me a photo of a painting she'd done in her grad school class. It was a landscape, all blues and greens, with a tiny figure at the bottom. The figure was a woman, walking away from something I couldn't see. I stared at the image for a long time. I typed back, "This is beautiful." She replied with a heart emoji. That was all. I went to work. The boutique hotel lobby was done. I had a new project starting next week, a townhouse in Pacific Heights that needed a full renovation. Maya had already sent me the preliminary notes. I sat at my desk and I reviewed them, made annotations, added sketches. The work came easily now. I didn't have to force it. I didn't have to push through the fog of distraction. It just flowed, the way it used to before everything fell apart. I took a break at noon. I walked down to the corner cafe, and I got a sandwich and a coffee, and I sat on a bench in the small plaza nearby. The sun was out. The fog had burned off. It was the kind of day that made you forget San Francisco could be cold. I watched people walk by. A woman pushing a stroller. A man in a suit talking on his phone. A teenager on a skateboard. Ordinary people doing ordinary things. I was one of them. Just another person in the city, living her life, moving forward. Claire invited me to dinner that night. I said yes. I walked down 2 flights of stairs and knocked on her door. She opened it with a bottle of wine in her hand and a smile on her face. "I made lasagna," she said. "It's not as good as my mother's, but it's edible." We ate at her kitchen table, which was covered in a floral tablecloth and surrounded by mismatched chairs. She told me about her husband, Tom, who died 2 years ago. She told me about the trip they'd taken to Italy. She told me about the way he'd laughed, loud and unself-conscious, the first time he saw the Colosseum. I told her about my trip to Italy with Michael, 20 years ago. We'd gone to Florence. We'd stood in front of the Duomo and he'd held my hand and told me he wanted to spend the rest of his life with me. He meant it then, I said. He probably did, Claire said. People change. That's not a betrayal. It's just what happens. I thought about that. People change. Michael had changed. I had changed. The man who'd held my hand in Florence was not the man who'd checked his watch at Sarah's wedding. And the woman who'd taken his hand was not the woman sitting at Claire's table. "Are you glad you left?" Claire asked. "I'm glad I finally did something," I said. I'm glad I didn't stay and pretend. That's all any of us can do, she said. Do the thing that makes you able to look at yourself in the mirror. I went back upstairs after dinner. I sat on the green velvet couch, and I looked at the city through the bay window. The lights were on. The cars were moving. The world was still spinning, even though mine had stopped for a while. I thought about the last conversation with Michael. The cafe. The way he'd looked at me like I was a stranger. I thought about what I'd said to him. The words came back to me, clear and sharp. I'm not leaving because you broke my heart. I'm leaving because I finally see how small you made my life. I'd meant it then. I meant it still. But it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that I'd made my own life small. I'd let him shrink me. I'd handed him the scissors and watched him cut. I'd done it for so long that I'd forgotten I was the one who let him. But that was over. I wasn't small anymore. I was the one who'd walked away. I was the one who'd painted the blue-gray walls and bought the green velvet couch and signed the lease on the third-floor walk-up. I was the one who'd sent the USB to the bride and watched her make her own choice. I was the one who'd sat in the cafe and told Michael exactly what I thought of him. I was the one who was still standing. I thought about the footage. I thought about David's cloud account, still logged in, still full of files I'd never looked at. I thought about the corrupted video, the parts of Michael he'd cut out, the parts of me he'd kept. I thought about David's voicemails, which I'd stopped listening to weeks ago. I thought about the message he'd left the night of the Napa wedding, the one I deleted without hearing. I didn't need to hear it. I knew what it said. He was sorry. He didn't mean it. He was the victim. He'd made a mistake. The same story every man told when he got caught. I didn't feel sorry for David. I didn't feel sorry for Michael. I felt sorry for myself a little. The woman who'd believed them. The woman who'd trusted them. The woman who'd spent years trying to make them happy and never once asked if she was happy to. But I didn't feel sorry for her for long. Because she was the one who'd found the footage. She was the one who'd watched the parking lot scene. She was the one who'd called Jane and opened the separate account and packed her bags in the middle of the night. She was the one who'd left. She was the one who'd survived. I looked at my phone. I scrolled through the contacts. Michael's name was still there. I stared at it. I hadn't deleted it. I didn't know why. Maybe I was waiting for the right moment. Maybe I was waiting to see if I'd ever need to call him again. I didn't think I would. I pressed delete. The name disappeared. I felt a small shift in my chest. Not relief. Not sadness. Just a quiet acknowledgement that I'd closed a door I didn't need to walk through again. I went to bed. I slept through the night. I woke up the next morning with the sun in my eyes and the smell of coffee in the air and the sound of the city outside my window. I got up. I took a shower. I got dressed. I went to work. I lived my life. A week passed. Then another. I went to Sarah's art show. She'd painted a series of landscapes, all of them with tiny figures in the distance. I bought one. A sunset, all oranges and reds, with a woman standing on a cliff overlooking the ocean. I hung it in my living room, above the green velvet couch. It was the first piece of art I'd bought that wasn't a compromise. I ran along the Embarcadero every morning. I pushed myself further. I ran past the tourist shops, past the cruise ships, past the piers until the city fell away, and all I could see was the water and the sky. I ran until I couldn't hear anything but my own breath. And then, one morning, I stopped. I stood at the edge of the water and I looked out at the bay. The sun was rising over the hills. The water was silver and gold. The fog was burning off. It was a beautiful morning. A morning I would have missed if I'd still been in the house, drinking coffee in the breakfast nook, waiting for Michael to kiss my forehead and walk out the door. I thought about the USB. The bride in Napa. I wondered if she was still on the beach, still posting photos of her freedom. I wondered if she thought about me. Probably not. She didn't know who I was. She just knew that someone had given her the truth. I thought about David. I wondered if he was still taking photos. I wondered if he'd learned anything. Probably not. He'd probably find a way to blame me. He'd probably tell himself he was the victim. He'd probably spend the rest of his life wondering why he couldn't hold on to the things he wanted. I thought about Michael. I wondered if he was still drinking. I wondered if he'd watered the roses. I wondered if he'd ever looked at the garden and thought about me. I didn't need to know. He wasn't my responsibility anymore. He was just a man who'd made choices, and I was a woman who'd made her own. I walked back to the apartment. I took a shower. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table and I looked at the monstera and the green velvet couch and the painting of the woman on the cliff. I thought about how far I'd come. I thought about how hard it had been. I thought about the mornings I'd woken up with my heart pounding and the nights I'd cried myself to sleep and the hours I'd spent walking through the house, touching the walls, wondering what I'd done wrong. I hadn't done anything wrong. I'd loved someone. I'd tried to build a life with him. I'd done everything I was supposed to do. And when he broke it, I rebuilt. I built something better. I built something that was mine. I looked at my phone. The date was there, blinking at me. 6 months since the wedding. 6 months since David knocked on the door. 6 months since I'd seen Michael get into Rachel's car. 6 months since I'd started this journey. I put my phone down. I didn't need the date. I didn't need to mark the time. I just needed to keep going. I went to work. I met with the townhouse client. I sketched out a design for the kitchen. I walked through the empty rooms and I imagined them full of life. I imagined the family who would live there. I imagined the meals they'd cook and the conversations they'd have and the memories they'd make. It was my job to make their space beautiful. It was my job to build something that would last. And I was good at it. I went home that night. I made dinner. I sat at the table that seated 4, alone, and I ate. I wasn't lonely. I was just by myself. There's a difference. One is empty. The other is full. I thought about the final conversation with Michael. The words I'd said to him in the cafe. The way he'd sat there, broken, and I'd walked out without looking back. I thought about what I'd told him. I'm not leaving because you broke my heart. I'm leaving because I finally see how small you made my life. I'd meant it then. I meant it still. But I'd also learned something else. He hadn't made my life small. He'd only made it small because I let him. And I'd stopped letting him. That was the whole point. That was the whole story. I stood up. I walked to the window. I looked out at the city. The lights were on. The cars were moving. The world was still spinning. And I was exactly where I was supposed to be.